Okay, welcome to Pygame Tutorials. This is probably the first video you're watching, as this is going to be the project where we're going to set everything up for our Pygame before we start actually building the game itself. Now, I'm assuming at this point you've already installed the Pygame library. If not, you'll need to go and do that. You can do that via the terminal using this instruction here, pip3 install Pygame. Or if you're using PyCharm, you can also go to your settings, go to your project, your interpreter here, and then you can install it using this plus icon where you can then search for Pygame and install the library from here. So once you've got that installed, now we're just going to do like a template project and set that up to begin with. So at the top, we're going to import the library, Pygame, and we're also going to import the system library as well, which can be useful later on. After we've done that, we need to initialize the Pygame library. And then we need to create a screen that's going to be used to display our game. And to do that, this screen object is created as a Pygame display. And then we have to set the mode. And in here, we're going to pass a tuple. Now, a tuple is when we have like a collection of values. So I just create a bit of space just to show you. It's actually two values passed in a single variable. Now, in this case, if I wanted to pass this as my width, this would be the width of the screen, and this would be the height in pixels. I need to pass them as one variable, so I have to put them in brackets like this. The reason I separated it is because as I take this out and put them here, it can always look a little bit confusing with the double brackets. Okay, so that's the reason for that being there. We are going to tidy this up in a little bit. But for the time being, that creates a screen. As I say, this is the width of the screen. This is the height of the screen. After that, we're going to create a clock. Now, if you have any knowledge of playing games, and you might know about frames per second, well, this is how we're going to control that. If we don't have a Pygame clock, basically the game will run as fast as our computer is, and that can be overly fast, and also performance will change depending on which computer you're playing it on. So by having a clock and determining how fast that's going to go, we can make sure the performance is consistent across most computers. After that, we're going to have our main game loop. Okay, if you've done any kind of game production before, then you'd probably be quite aware of this. But basically, games work like a flip book, where you used to draw like the little pictures in the corner of each page, and then you would flick the pages to make it look like the picture's moving. This is very much how a game works. Instead of flipping a page, the game loops multiple times per second. Ideally, we're going to be looking at around 60 times per second for the game to loop. So it's just a continuous loop, so we can use a while true statement here. And then the command just before the loop happens again is we want to update the display. This will be one of the last commands that we run in this loop before it will go back round. There shouldn't really be much else under that. The only thing I'm going to set here is the speed of our clock. And currently, we're going to set it to 60 frames per second. Okay, so things that we want to check now when the game's looping. Well, every time the game loops, the player who's playing the game is going to be touching keys, pressing different combinations, maybe using a control pad. And all of these are going to be registered by the Pygame engine as an event. So every time the game loops round, we want to go through and check all of the events that have occurred since we last looped. So to do that, we're going to use a for loop. And we're going to loop over all of the events that have occurred. Now, the one that's going to be important for our template is if the user has clicked in the top right-hand corner, basically up here in the game window. So if they click up here, we want the game to close. So we're going to say if the event type is equal to Pygame quit. In other words, if they've clicked on that red cross, this is a recognized built-in action that's happened. And we're going to stop the engine. Okay, so we started it here. And here we're going to stop it. And also we're going to call a system exit, which will close the whole application down. Okay, so if I run this now, so we've got one mistake here. I've got this around the wrong way. Should be display. The update. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, great. So here's our window here, and that's looking good at the moment. Right, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to set the title of the game on the window, and we're also going to tidy up our code a little bit. So the first thing, we're going to go back up above the game loop, okay, and we're going to call the Pygame library, the display, and we're going to set the caption, and you can put here whatever you want the title of your game to be. Now, where this will display, if I run the game again, you'll see it comes up here at the top of the window, okay? The next thing we'll look at is to change the color of the background. We can go down here and we can use the fill on our rectangle. And this works very similar to when we were doing the screen width and screen height, in that we have to pass a tuple. Now, I don't know how much you know about colors, but if we just, for example, set up a color here initially, now you have 3 values that you need to pass. The first one here is the amount of red, and 0 basically turns the red light off, and 255 is going to turn the red light to maximum intensity. Okay, and then this is the same, but for green, and this is the same, but for blue. Okay, so we're going to set this to 255. So you can see I've used the tuple here. Now I could take that and put that here, but I could also use this variable. Now this variable isn't going to stay here because otherwise we're declaring it every time the game loops, which is pretty pointless. But just to show how this works initially. Okay, so now we've got a red background on the screen, and you can change these colors. So 255 being the maximum, and with these different combinations, it gives you around 16 point something million colors to play with. So I think that's probably enough. So let's tidy up the code a bit. We've got some fixed values in here. This is fixed here, which is not great, and we've got this variable just hanging around in here. Now these are kind of pieces of information we might want throughout our program. Okay, we might need to find out what the screen width and height is. We might want to use this red elsewhere when we're setting colors. So rather than redeclaring it and reusing it each time or struggling to get hold of data, what we're going to do is we're going to create another Python file. So I'm going to go up, create a new Python file, and I'm going to call this settings.py. Okay, now in here, I'm going to take those values, and I'm going to set 2 variables, screen width and screen height. I'm also going to take the red one that we had from here and move it here. Now, generally, because this color red isn't going to change, we would call this a constant. And constants in Python tend to be written in all capitals. So I'm going to change that to red. I won't do that here because potentially I might choose to change this as the game's being played. Okay, so we need to call this red, but as you can see, this is underlined. It doesn't understand the reference to red at the moment. It can't see the variable in another file. And we would have the same issue here when I call this screen width and screen height. So to be able to see these, we're going to have to get them from the settings. I'm going to say from the settings file, I want to import, and then I can bring in the variables that I need here. This is okay if you a lazier way of doing it, but if you're bringing in importing a lot of variables, you can just put a star there and it will bring everything in. Okay, but if we've only imported a few, it's best to be a bit more explicit and say which variables you're using. You can see now here these aren't underlined anymore. And I think as a setup, this is pretty good to go now. Just double check it works. Yep, that looks good. Everything's running. So we've got our main file where we've got our project all set up, ready to go. We've got our settings where we can put our variables that need to be shared between files. So from here, you go back to the tutorials and then you can choose the path to which video you feel will be more beneficial for you next. Okay, good luck.